Lateral networking, or why the internet simply isn't panoptic. Panopticism is a tricky thing to tackle, so it makes sense to start at the very beginning. But let's take it one step further, or backward. Let's start before the beginning. Before you, before me, before Foucault, before sliced bread, all the way back to ancient Greece. Now there's this guy named Cicero, and he had some pretty cool stuff to say. Behold his voice, speaking through time. No one can speak well unless he thoroughly understands his subject. Sounds pretty wise. So we've got to fully understand what panopticism is before we can make any conclusions about it. In fact, the argument that I'm making follows directly just from understanding panopticism. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The first question is, what is panopticism? Well, it has two main roots, pan and optic. Not that kind of pan, the all kind of pan, as in all-seeing. You know how your every digital move is tracked, and Facebook knows your deepest, darkest secrets, and you're always being watched whenever you're on the internet, and Google is just biding its time until it becomes your new evil overlord, and... But wait, just because something's all-seeing doesn't mean it's panoptic. There's more to it than that. For a panoptic mechanism to function, it needs two main things: discipline and surveillance. Surveillance is relatively easier to wrap your mind around, so it tends to get more attention. But what about discipline? Now, because Foucault is Foucault, or maybe because he's a philosopher, he likes to be vague, and by that I mean he likes to give the same word several different meanings. Discipline is one of these words. The sort of discipline that I'm picking on here is the sort that divides and organizes people, that infiltrates the space between them and separates them from one another, that stacks people into levels and prevents those levels from interacting. This division makes people easier to deal with. Discipline forms the walls of the panoptic prison. The presence of surveillance or discipline alone doesn't mean that a mechanism is panoptic. When you mix discipline that's everywhere, surveillance that sees everything, and power, that's when you get panopticism. Okay, so back to the internet. Now that we know what panopticism is, what's the internet? Well, the internet takes a slightly different approach, and by slightly different I mean totally opposite. Instead of dividing people and stacking them, it puts everyone on the same level. And if you were to look down on the internet from above, you could see this tangled mess of connections. That's why we call it the web. You could also call it a lateral network, which just means that everything's on the same level and everything's connected. Everything. Even if you were able to remove a key node from the network, there are still thousands of ways to get from one point to another. Communities that could never form geographically form digitally, from comic book fans to terrorist insurgents. So, where does that leave the internet and panopticism? Well, regardless of whether the internet's good or bad, there's one thing that's clear. It's not simple. Panopticism depends on order, and the very structure of the internet has a way of undoing that order. It's not as easy to lump people into certain groups anymore, because people can be a part of as many different communities as they want. Geographical separations are becoming less and less relevant. In the end, the nature of the internet and the nature of panopticism are fundamentally at odds. No matter how complex Foucault's writing is, it's still too simple to describe the chaotic web of connections and power interactions that is the internet. So, that leaves us at Internet 1, Panopticism 0.